Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for your attendance. I am Commissioner Maida Coleman from Missouri. I am so happy that you have joined us. Please forgive us for the delay, having slight um, uh, technical issues that I think have been resolved at this point. And so we really do appreciate your patience and waiting for us. So excited that you have come today to be a part of this webinar on creating a workplace culture centered in belonging, best practices, and case studies. We thank you so much, and we appreciate you taking this time today. Just a little bit about what we will be doing today. As you can see on the screen, here's a little bit of helpful information. We request that if you have questions to please submit those questions in the chat. Our goal is to answer them as we go along, if we can, of course, do that. And as time allows, the panelists will answer those questions from the audience, as I just mentioned. Our goal also is that at the end of the webinar, to be able to answer any other questions that may be out there. And as you'll see in the third bullet, that resources mentioned during the webinar will be available to those of you all in attendance today. So we will move on and let you know that our moderator today is the amazing Devontae Lewis, Commissioner from the state of Louisiana. I am so excited about Commissioner Lewis's participation and his agreement to moderate this panel, as he is definitely a star in not only in Louisiana, but across the country. He has stepped into his leadership role at the commission since 2022 and has just hit the ground running. As you can see, we also have our panelists today, Gwen Mizell with Ameren, Constance Taylor, also with Ameren Corporation, and Christina Nichols with Renewables Forward. So we're going to have a great time today. Thank you again so much for attending, and I will now turn this over to Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Coleman, and good afternoon to everyone. I want to thank you for joining what I think is going to be an amazing conversation today about how we create a workplace culture centered in belonging, best practices, case studies, and things to know. I have three amazing panelists, and I'm not going to try to introduce them because I think they can tell their own stories a lot better than I can. But we today are really going to kind of have a conversation. So please feel free to, as Commissioner Coleman said, drop questions or comments in the chat. We'll be watching them. I'm going to save a little bit of time before we get towards the end of the hour. I know we're a little bit behind, so I'm going to do my best to get us back on track, but we may just go a smidge over the top of the hour to do so. But what I'm going to do now, so we can get this conversation started, is I'm going to ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves and why they believe we must center creating workplace cultures and belonging. And then we'll go to some questions with our panelists and have a great discussion. So I'm going to start with my screen, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Constance, to introduce yourself, or Connie, I should say.
Good afternoon. I answer to both, and just really excited to be here and be a part of this conversation. It's so important. My name is Connie Taylor. I am part of Ameren Corporation, and I lead our efforts related to energy equity solutions, which really looks at how we, as we transition through this transition to cleaner energy, how do we make sure that no community gets left behind, and that we look at ways to drive benefits and equitable outcomes as it relates to a number of areas. But for today's particular conversation, I'll focus in on workplace and workforce development and how we partner with community on those efforts. So just really excited to be here today.
Thank you so much, Connie. Chris, we'll give you a moment to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank my other panelists. Very, very honored to be here with you all. I'm Chris Nichols. I'm the Executive Director of Renewables Forward. We are a nonprofit coalition representing action-oriented companies, nonprofits, labor unions, training institutions that have pledged and committed to take action toward building a more inclusive, diverse, and equitable energy industry. So we've developed a number of tools, calculators, but the biggest thing is to build cultures of inclusion requires action. There's some policy element to it, but what we do is support our members in terms of mentorship, peer counseling, workforce training, all sorts of activities, but building across the industry, both the expectation and a successful maturity in our DEI belonging and access status. So really honored to be here with you today.
Thank you so much, Chris. We're so pleased to have you. And last but certainly not least, Gwen, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis, and thank you to my fellow panelists. I too am thrilled to be here today. Gwen Mizell, and I work for Ameren Corporation. I serve as the Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainability, Diversity, and Philanthropy Officer for the company. Basically help design and develop the strategy around how we're going to impact most as a utility, most of the communities and customers that we serve. We are an electric and gas utility. We serve 2.4 million customers. And as we transition into this cleaner energy future, there are opportunities that didn't exist before. But in order to facilitate those opportunities, we need people both inside and outside to help us to do this work. And there has to be intentionality. Chris mentioned intentionality. There has to be intentionality to make sure you've got the highly skilled, diverse workforce, both inside, and you're building talent in your communities in order to facilitate this transition. So happy to be here.
Well, great. Thank you so much. And as you can see, we have a very diverse but well expertise panel. And so, Gwen, since you started, we're going to start with you and kind of just centering us and grounding us in this conversation. And so what role does leadership play in fostering a culture of belonging and creating a workplace where employees feel valued? What does that look like from the top level?
Yeah, I tell you, Commissioner, this is leadership is critical to make this happen because, there are a couple of realities. Number one, there's a war for talent, a war for highly skilled, diverse talent. And we're all trying to get the same people. And so in order for us to be successful, we've got to flow that down from leadership in terms of what our company is about, how we're going to execute this transition, what our values are. We have to be crystal clear about that. That all starts with leadership. And so, and to create that culture of inclusion and belonging, leadership has to recognize that there are certain things that drive a sense of belonging, a safe place where people can engage with others and build around common goals, like with employee resource groups. There has to be, recognition for people's achievements, things like, we have exceptional performance bonuses. We have things that say, we see you, we appreciate you. We have to have development opportunities for people so that they can develop to their fullest potential. And so many of those things, making space for many of those things is driven from the leadership level. And so you have to have a leadership team that really believes this, that develops the space for this to happen. And it's not going to happen without that leadership. So that's why it's critical for leaders to put those things in place that will allow our coworkers to develop to their fullest capacity. And we recognize that it is a key tentacle to the business. So it's not extra. This is a part of the work that we have to do in getting our business done.
No, thank you so much, Quinn. I think you're really tapping at, for those of us on the call, we either are regulating utilities, work at a utility, or around the space of utilities. And I think that question about how creating that culture really matters. Chris, I'm going to turn to you because I think you can definitely build off of this point that Will was making about it starts with leadership. But I'm really curious at what actions have you seen or you know that to be the most effective and effectively impacting change towards more inclusive practices, especially in the industry that we're talking about today, the regulated utility space?
Absolutely. I don't want to give a hats off to many utilities that are already somewhat more diverse than their industry peers, in that many utilities hire veterans at far greater rates and proportion than other manufacturing and other sectors of the United States economy. So I want to give utilities credit for that. The most successful practices we've seen among clean energy industry leaders start with leadership, as Glenn was saying. But there's subtlety to it. The leaders have to announce. There's a public mission statement that includes commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's commitment to community engagement. That commitment from the leadership, from the top, must be seen by the board of directors, the shareholders, the ratepayers, and especially the company workforce itself as real. There have to be actions that people can point to and say, yeah, that was the policy, and here's where we're seeing it in action. And when you see that, you have the top down and the bottom up driving toward the same mission alignment. We know this is good for business. There's no reason not to do these things, because businesses that are more inclusive, that are that can prove it throughout the ranks, from the entry level person to middle management to the VPs to the C-suite, when every person in the value chain can say, yeah, I feel like I belong to, say, Ameren, or I believe in the values of this company. I think we are doing good things for the planet. I feel like I'm engaged in positive work. That's when you see successful business 3 times more profitable than not diverse peers, 8 times more resilient, 4 times more innovative. These are measurements that have been ranked by McKinsey and other, third-party organizations to prove across a range of businesses, but particularly energy businesses. Inclusive, belonging cultures really develop a better business environment, better customer service, more efficient operations, more profitability and sustainability for the business and for the ratepayers.
No, I mean, I think that model that you talked about is extremely important about how we are looking at this holistically, connecting those dots. And so, Connie, I mean, something that Chris mentioned was that community engagement, right? That piece of not only looking at the internal work, but how that external work connects to it. And so I'm really curious about, how do you feel communities play a role in shaping companies like yours, culture for belonging, and what strategies do you employ to ensure that community development is there? And then also, how does it align with workforce development? Because oftentimes we see these two things separate when they probably should be seen as one, that your community development work is your workforce development work. So could you talk about how you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. And just really appreciate the comments and the fact, the importance of the business case for inclusion, and building a culture of inclusion really relies on having a strong talent pool. And connectivity with our community is key to that. At Ameren, we always say customers and communities are at the center of everything we do. And when communities thrive, we thrive. So being able to connect with community to make sure that we're we're having a talent pool that's constantly feeding the growing needs of the business is essential. And we have networks through our community development teams, through our regional account executives, but we wanted to have a more formal framework for that connectivity. And we have implemented what we call community voices advisory boards. We have 2 so far, and they're made up of representation of community leaders from clergy, from academia, from social services, from healthcare, from small businesses, from a whole gambit. And we meet on a regular basis. We have an advisory board in our St. Louis area and in our mid-Missouri area that is more of our regional and some rural communities as well. But it's so important that we have that two-way communication because they can help hear what our challenges may be. We saw that from a skilled craft arena, we saw that we had an opportunity to grow in making sure that our skilled craft trade positions were filled by folks that were representative of all of our communities. And our CVABs, what we call them, the Community Voices Advisory Board, they're like, hey, we can help you with that, Amber. And in partnership with our leaders, they actually got together and started a workforce development subcommittee that said, hey, let's talk to education leaders, for example, to make sure that high schoolers know about ways to engage with the energy sector and come through those skilled craft jobs where they may not want to pursue a 4-year college degree. So that group worked together with our HR team, with our training folks, and they were able to provide information to superintendents, to classroom teachers, to counselors about how young people in high school can access these skilled trade positions that are paying. You know, we have a 19-year-old who makes $100,000 a year, and he doesn't have a college bill in that situation, but really trying to foster this inclusion from community members that may have had challenges or barriers in accessing these jobs. The community has played and continues to play a vital role in that aspect.
Oh no, thank you so much, Connie. I mean, that's one actually. That's amazing to hear that how you have included someone so young to be able to be on that path to prosperity. And so, Chris, this actually this makes me think of a question that I was going to ask you. And I think it's timely. I mean, I think oftentimes when we talk about cultural belonging, we typically center on gender and race, right? Those are the two places because they have been kind of the two biggest areas of inequalities that we have seen in our country. But I guess my question that I'm really getting towards asking you about is how can utilities, for example, go beyond, like we just heard the example using age, go beyond race and gender within workplace culture to ensure measures of belonging in multiple different ways that diversity shows up.
Absolutely. And this plagues not just utilities, but every single business that wish to become more diverse. How do we measure these things effectively? How do we get the feedback we need? Generally, we suggest, and we provide tools for this, by the way, through Renewables Forward that are free to use. So utilities here, I think these slides will be provided after the call to all the participants, and we have a number of links there. So come to Renewables Forward, we'll give you those resources. But leadership, again, as Gwen mentioned, leadership has to say, we will measure this and we will find ways and we will engage the community, as Connie said, and we will. So the we will has to play out in what is generally an annual survey type instrument where you ask the employees, do you feel like how do you feel? Do you feel like you're included, valued? Do you feel your opportunities are there? To the community, how do you see this utility operating among you? Are we your neighbor and a friendly ally, or are we some distant force that just charges you for your energy bill? How can we be more equal partners? How can we listen to each other? But so the measurement instrument has to include things for internal to the utility, such as the workforce. You just got to measure those demographics, but you have to also include demographics such as neurodivergence, differently abled employees. You have to include things like LGBTQ status. If it's safe, as Gwen said, if this is a culture of belonging and individuals feel safe disclosing certain things like a disability or a different sexual orientation, they will pony up. And it needs to be safe because all these different perspectives. Also, we at Renewables Forward also like to measure socioeconomic background. And similar to what Connie said, we're creating a whole system of community partnership teams. Ameren is ahead of the pack for a series of about 50 rural electric cooperatives across the country who very much also want to be diverse and listen to their communities. They feel they're already very community oriented, and they are, but you've got to go beyond just like, oh, we'll talk to the mayor or we'll talk to the city council and they'll let us know what this community needs. No. More of what Connie said, mixture of community organizations, direct service, those who are active, those who are the natural allies and voices of the community must be brought in to infer the full range of values and benefits the community shares. Is it place? Do they want wealth sharing with that energy utility? A lot of my companies and Renewables Forward members generate clean power, solar, wind, hydropower, battery storage. So we encourage a whole program of wealth sharing with the community at the discretion.
No, I mean, I think that's really insightful about how you kind of transition from that community knowledge into practices that really can then be measurable. I think that was the key word that you kept saying is, what is those measurable goals, right? Not just that we have goals, but how are we measuring those goals? And when this goes to a question for you that I'm thinking about is because that measurement, I think, really plays into improvements or changes in recruitment, also talks about how you retain the staff that you have when making an intentional ask like that. So I'm really curious when it comes to retention, recruitment, promotions in this conversation. What are the best practices and innovation strategies that you've implemented to ensure inclusive culture? And then how do you measure that success? Because I think we've talked a lot about getting people in the system, but how do you then talk about people who are already there and now trying to be inclusive in their either promotion or staying within the company? So can you talk to that a little bit for us?
Were you asking me
want
or
me
Gwen?
to?
I'm sorry.
Let's start with
Commissioner-
Gwen on that question. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. No problem. So I'll tell you, being able to retain the workforce that you've worked so hard to bring in the door is critical. And so we lose money when we have turnover. And so a company like ours, luckily, we have extraordinarily low turnover, but it's not by chance. I mean, there's a lot of elements that make folks want to stay and grow within Ameren. And so we recognize that turnover is something that is our enemy. And so a company like ours, we have to say, it's hard to find the highly technical skills that we need, the diverse talent that we need. So once we get them, we want them to stick. And so a big piece of that, and we, like Chris mentioned, we do pulse our coworkers to understand how are people feeling? How are they feeling really connected to the future and the strategy of the company? When they think about the future of the picture of that company, do they see themselves in the future of being at Ameren over a 10, 15, 20-year career? And many times what we find from our pulse surveys or our engagement surveys is that people are interested in being able to have development opportunities to grow and to thrive, to be their very best selves. And so we think about development from a range, from kind of three perspectives. One is offering people the opportunity to have challenging environments or challenging tasks, having the opportunity to learn from others, and then kind of formalized training. that being more classroom or coursework. And so one of the big ties that we have seen to kind of retention and people feeling like they're a part is if they are involved in mentoring and sponsorships. And so that's why we've opened up the mentoring aperture for everyone in our organization who so desires to be a part of a mentoring cohort. And so I think that's been really critical for people to feel like they can connect with folks who've been there, done that, that can help guide them through their journeys in their careers. The sponsorship component is huge as well, because that says that somebody's speaking on your behalf when you're not in the room. And so they are saying, hey, Chris is phenomenal. I've worked with Chris on project A, B, C, D. So when there's an opportunity that comes up, then I'm speaking on behalf of Chris as Chris's proxy in that situation. And so that sponsorship is critical. And for people to feel like people understand what their value is, that they are really articulating that in rooms that matter, is really important. A couple of other things when I think about our workforce, we try to make sure that everybody has an individual development plan, an IDP, so that we have a sense. Leaders need to understand where people want to go. Everybody doesn't want to ascend to the CEO seat, but there may be some ways that they want to grow. It could be horizontal growth, doesn't have to be vertical growth. And so having coworkers identify what their desires are as they move forward is critically important. And having some resources out there for those who may want to get advanced degrees. So tuition reimbursement. We offer all those things to our coworkers as well. And lastly, Chris mentioned measurement. It's really important that we measure how well these things are working. And just last week, we hosted an organization called Fair 360 that used to be Diversity Inc. Each year, Diversity Inc. gets survey data from thousands of Fortune 500 companies. And for the last 15 years, we've participated in a benchmarking exercise with Fair 360. And they look at our DE&I processes and programs. They look at leadership accountability. They look at workplace practices. They look at talent programs. And in 5 of those 6 categories in which they measure us, 5 of them show Ameren as exceeding the companies that show up in the top 10, their top 10 ratings, which is a huge deal. We have been rated as a Hall of Fame diversity company by Fair 360, and there are only 12 companies nationwide that are a part of that designation. And, and some of the things that distinguish us are the fact that we do have 44% of our executive leadership team are Black executives, Black or ethnically diverse executives, I should say. 69% of our board of directors are either gender, racially, or ethnically diverse. Those things don't happen by chance. There's a lot of intentionality. Leadership has to define that is important to our business, and we are not lowering quality, but we are definitely infusing an element of inclusion as we think about filling many of those very impactful seats that are responsible for leading the future of the company.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That is so amazing to hear about that progress and that diversity. And I'm going to go to one of the audience questions because I think this is a very timely point to interject it. And this is for anybody to answer it. And they said, honesty and diversity, equity, and inclusion is important, but how can one find comfort in being counted as a particular category without feeling like a statistic for the company? So does anybody have, and this is for anybody to answer, does anybody have anything to particularly say on that question from the audience? Chris, I think I see you're ready to go, so I'll tee you up first.
Okay, I love this question. How do we avoid tokenism, in other words? Well, the very act of feeling like you have a company that has enveloped cultures of inclusion and belonging avoids that status of tokenism. And it's kind of like those expressions, you'll know it when you see it. You know when you're being tokenized, you know it. But you also, if you're in a professional setting, you understand the importance of measurement. The pulse surveys, the external surveys, internal surveys, these are things companies utilities, especially regulated entities, have to report on these things. So they have to do surveys that collect data like demographics, like identities, and so forth. So I think most people in a company understand that, yeah, there's a purpose to this thing, as long as that's not the only status you feel within that company. I really want to give huge praise to Ameren for its wraparound efforts. We've talked, especially for workforce, about the importance of entry-level programs, training, acknowledgement, career development. These things have to be known to all the employees and the board and the stakeholders of the company. If it's like a secret program that nobody knows about, then you're not going to feel like it's available to you. But your advancement, your opportunity to increase your education, ask for more responsibility, develop your professional career, take it up or out. Those are things that good companies provide their employees and that candidates who want to work for that company know about during the job interview. Very attractive. As Gwen said, we're all in a war for talent. It's not, and it's expensive to hire, but it's even more expensive when people walk away from your company because they're dissatisfied. Yes. So it is well worth it to invest in employee career development, employee listening, employee resource groups. Anything you can do to retain good talent is so worth it, not just for the company, but for that individual and the community.
Yeah. Can I jump onto the bandwagon there?
Go ahead, Gwen. Can you please go?
Chris, very, very well said. I tell you, I think it's just so important too for companies to keep their finger on the pulse of what is going on kind of in their areas, in their service areas, among their customers, the communities that they serve. So we are a utility company and we serve everybody. And so we have to pay attention to trying to aspire to having a workforce that reflects the customers that we're serving. And therein lies the natural need to have DE&I initiatives. So there's a natural need for us to do that if we want to better align with our customers and truly understand what our customer needs are. One of the things that we've seen in our workforce is that we are trending to a much younger workforce. So just under 50% of our workforce at this point are Gen Zs or millennials. And so you think about that, they think about different things. They care about different things. They care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They care about sustainability and how you're going to manage your climate risks. They care about workforce flexibility. They care about being able to, to infuse their passions in their work. And so how can we not have things that really accommodate a group that's making up almost half of our workforce at this? I mean, we would be tone deaf if we weren't paying attention to that.
I want to bring up.
Chime in as well.
Yeah, please, Connie, jump in.
Again, just so much rich conversation here, and this whole being able to infuse passion. And I looked up the definition for belonging, and it says that belonging is all about creating an environment where every employee feels valued, connected, and supported. It's about ensuring that individuals can be their authentic selves at work without fear of being excluded or judged. And one aspect of that is really being able to provide opportunities through volunteerism and connecting back with communities, being able to express and infuse your passion through volunteerism. And that's not something that's taken lightly at Ameren. We reward and incentivize our co-workers to be involved in the communities and actually provide dollars to the organizations that they volunteer with to help reward that work. And we provide matching incentives for when they make contributions to these organizations. Again, we're only as strong as the communities we serve. And if being able to show up and be your authentic self means being able to contribute to the communities where we work and live, then that's a very essential way of promoting a culture of belonging.
that's also a way of avoiding a trend that we've heard about in the media called quiet quitting. And this is not, specific to utilities or energy. It's when individuals don't feel satisfied or challenged or like they belong, they kind of phase out. And so that culture of belonging really, eliminates a quitting culture. It's like when you feel like you belong, you give yourself to that organization, that utility. Gwen raised a really important point too, in that challenges and these there's a real generational difference. Now, utilities have, and Ameren is very unusual, by the way, in your age split. A lot of utilities are skewing a little older than that in their workforces. I want to bring up a completely different industry. The National Hydropower Association knows that the hydropower industry is quite old. And they are also looking for this talent, for that next generation of engineers and facilities and water experts to come in. Their average age is 62 for their professionals across the industry. How do they, in usually remote rural locations, attract Generation Alpha, which is the youngest people coming up in high school now, junior high and high school? Same basic formula as Ameren and any utility must follow. That is, invest in the community, invest in the workforce pipeline. We as employers are used to just like putting out the job description and people come. That's not true anymore.
Right. That's exactly right, Chris. I tell you, I mean, that, so critical for, one of the critical things for us, Connie and I talk about this all the time, partnerships are critical because, when you think about identifying organizations that are really doing great work around workforce development, you want to understand which organizations are doing those things. And you want to understand, who's doing what and where there's overlap, and figure out how you partner up with those organizations, because we're Ameren. Our day job is not necessarily to do workforce development. Right. So the best way for us is to partner with entities that have that as their remit, their specific charge. And so you think about some of the partnerships that Connie started talking about, some of the partnerships that we built to raise awareness around non-traditional job pathways. You think about like CEWD partnering with the Urban League. You think about some of the schools that we partner with, North Tech, South Tech, East St. Louis, in order to bring in those high school students into some of those high-paying skilled craft jobs that don't require the college degrees. You think about collaborations with HBCUs, but one of the challenges that we have found with HBCUs is typically you're not turning out engineers, which is that's kind of our sweet spot. So what can we do about that? We can help build up the pipeline of engineers through non-traditional partnerships with HBCUs and traditional four-year universities. Let's say a Harris Stowe and a St. Louis University. A 3-2 program is ideal for us. You have the HBCU input, but then the person goes through another 2 years at a four-year institution, gets the engineering degree, and you facilitated them being able to get a degree that might not have cost quite as much if they started out in the four-year institution. So we have to think about creative ways that go beyond the traditional 4-year or 5-year technical degree that most people go through. Let's think about how we build those alternative pathways to get to the same end that we want to get to, but we also open the aperture for inclusion, and it allows more people to be able to go through that pathway if you have an alternative path. So
that is so good. I think that is the way we should be thinking about this. And so kind of this really has me thinking of something that I want you to talk about is, well, what are those strategies that engage the communities, the way that Gwen is talking about them, that can be employed to foster long-term and sustainable partnerships, right? Because I mean, I think Gwen's point is highlighting the challenge, right? That the ecosystem is ever evolving, which means we have to find that through line of strategies that continue us through generation changes, through workplace environment changes, right? I mean, I think we can all acknowledge COVID changed
Yes.
what workplace means and what it looks like. And so from your experience, what are those strategies that we should be looking at, especially when you're talking about engaging the communities that your company exists in to be sustainable, to withstand these evolutions that we're seeing?
Oh, absolutely. You know, we've talked about a number of different strategies. You know, some of the options and ideas that Gwen mentioned and that Chris mentioned, but you know, also investments in the community. You know, through philanthropic support is key, and not, you know, there are very important ones that are time tested and true, but being innovative is so essential because we're trying to capture the hearts and minds of young people of different generations that have other priorities and other thoughts and distractions, right? So one example that I'm really excited about, Gwen mentioned working with HBCUs. We work with Lincoln University in Missouri, and in partnership with an organization called Project Reach. And Project Reach provides cybersecurity experiences to high school students. And so, okay, that's great. So we were able to bring high school students from Jefferson City and from the metro area of St. Louis into our facilities, into our offices, and they got to see real time threats coming in, and just seeing how on top of cybersecurity our forces, our organization has to be, and just being able to show them that this is a career that you can be involved with. It was just really exciting seeing the young folks eyes light up that, you know, hey, this is kind of like gaming almost. And I'm trying to figure out, instead of the enemy being someone on some video game, this is someone that's really trying to attack something that's near and dear to all of our hearts, and that's having reliable energy. So not only did we bring them in partnership with Lincoln and with Project Reach, but we also brought them in on Earth Day. During our whole corporate Earth Day celebration, we had these students participate in that. So they got exposure to EV technologies. They got exposure to conversations from our sustainability team. So again, just helping them see their place and their opportunities is so powerful and so important, so that when they do leave high school, if they do go to college, if they do follow a non-traditional path, hopefully they'll think about energy as an option to be a part of that, to help bring wealth to their families and change the trajectory of their communities.
That is simply wonderful. And I mean, I think that taps on why this work is so important, why thinking about belonging is so important, because it is not only simply about making a company better, it is about making a community better. But there's a question in the chat that I think is so timely in this point of the conversation, which is, how do we handle the naysayers? How do we counter the perception among those who do not fully understand or believe in or grasp the concepts of why diversity, equity, inclusion is there? What do we do to those who think it runs counter to the principles of meritocracy in our workplace? And so, Chris, I'll start with you, and then Gwen and Connie, feel free to chime in. Like, what are strategies people could use, especially in this moment where DEI is the three-letter word that you should not say? How do you focus on belonging when people are telling you that's not where you should go?
I think humans have always warmed to groups, organizations that bring out the aspirational in us. We know we have higher purpose. We know we are more than ourselves. The term DEI has kind of been fairly recent. You could call it other things. You could call it resilience. You could call it sustainability. You could call it human valued and mission aligned work for your community. But we in the United States are in a unique position of correcting a racism that is hundreds of years old. Our systems have built inequity into so many different pieces of life. If you are of a dominant race or healthy, or you may not be even aware. So many business leaders, I don't blame anybody who's a naysayer. It may not have affected your life if you are a, for instance, white, educated person of wealth. You're not even aware that this is a problem. But the rest of us know how deep this goes. We're not starting with equality. We want equity, which balances the historic situation of so many people in the now. And so correcting things that should never have been there in the first place is our generation's challenge, is the moment we face now. But we know in taking this on, we're actually benefiting everybody, individuals, communities, business bottom lines, business efficiency, utility operations. There really is no downside. So people who are opposing or uncomfortable with the concept of DEI, you can call it something else. But what it really means is improving the situation between your individual life and the lives that you interconnect with throughout this country. In utility space, as Gwen said, utilities serve everybody. Utilities should represent everybody. Utility workforces should look like the communities that they serve and where their assets are located. And there's so many ways to do that. It's really not that hard, but it's also not that quick. And so that's the thing I want to bring home. We have lived in a system for 400, 500 years, thousands of years, where humans want to separate and be in their tribes. We can't correct that, even as wonderful and as beneficial it is. It's going to take investment, education, intentionality throughout all of our systems, led by leadership, but throughout the organization. And everyone has a stake in that. I want to thank Ameren, especially for creating such a well-rounded program. But understand that took investment, intentionality, leadership. 15 years, you said you've been in the FAIR 360 survey. These things don't happen in one year or one regulatory cycle. There's persistence involved in building these cultures. It's all good at the end of the day, but we've got to live through the rough patch and keep pushing forward.
Chris,
No.
I appreciate, I'm sorry.
No, good. Please go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, I appreciate Chris for that commentary on Ameren, and we certainly feel like we're making good progress. We get the kind of the objective affirmation that we're making good progress, but we absolutely know that we've not arrived, and nor has any other company arrived. So therein lies the challenge. We have to keep pushing. A couple things that have happened in our system is that number one, we're an investor-owned utility. And so we rely on dollars that come from the investment community. And so many times we're out talking to investors. And I, as the Chief Sustainability Officer and Chief Diversity Officer, have started to be a part of those conversations, along with our Chief Financial Officer and our CEO. And investors have started to ask over the last 3 years, what are your plans around sustainability? And I'm not just talking about the environmental piece. I'm not just talking about how rapidly are you going to exit coal and bring on renewables. I'm also talking about that all important social impact component on workforce, on rates, on community impacts. And so when those questions started to really bubble up, that's when we said, you know what, it makes sense for us to bring diversity, philanthropy, and sustainability all together. And we talk about how we will sustain our company holistically, not just environmentally, but from a people perspective, social impact inside and outside our company. And that's really driven the company to really be more intentional about DE&I, because it is a subcomponent, a major subcomponent of the sustainability and long-term viability of your company. And so that, I think, has been just a game changer for us, combining those three and bumping that work all up to report directly to our CEO.
Yes.
So that's one piece. And then, you know, I think we make space in our workforce for what we call crucial conversations, where during the course of the day, we think it's so important that we take people out of their day-to-day work and bring them in their work groups to have conversations that are uncomfortable, that are more DE&I driven, so that they can understand the connectivity between that and the future of our business, and why we all need to work together as a team, be respectful, and trust each other. Otherwise, our company is not going to thrive. And so those steps toward intentionality, ties to business outcomes, ties to personal outcomes, I think are so critical to building that kind of culture that are going to allow you to sustain your company for the future.
I think that is so intentional about like what's happening in this moment and how you sustain it. And so I think Connie, I know we're getting close, but I want to ask you this question about how do we keep community involved, right? I mean, I think we've focused a lot about the company following and being engaged with the community, but sometimes it also works on the opposite end, right? Where the community led is changing the culture of the company. And so I guess the question is, how can community-led change be incorporated, right, from either direction? Because I mean, at some points we recognize that movements come from community. I mean, I think we think about the intentionality around racial belonging after the murder of George Floyd, right? That was something that the community pushed companies to do. It wasn't a company-driven movement. So how does that? What do you think? How should companies think about incorporating those moments in times where community steps up and asks a company to be a leader in belonging and culture?
I think that, and I know that we're running close to the end of time, but I think the way that we keep connected with the community is by keeping connected with the community, continuing to listen, continuing to understand that, again, we're only as strong as the communities we serve, and having some viable and structured ways for two-way communications to take place and to continue to drive towards a value proposition that creates a winning situation for everyone that's involved. When someone talked about the whole question of DE&I and what issues that can represent in terms of some of the volatility that's around it these days, you know, it really comes down to two things: the earth and each other. And the best that we can take care of both of those, that creates a winning situation for everyone involved.
I think you are absolutely right. I think you have hit it on the nail on the head about what we should be doing. And so I know we are right up on the hour. I know we started a little bit late, so I'm gonna close this out before we get to some important information. Just one question that I'm gonna ask everybody, because I strongly believe when we do these conversations, people should take something away. So I guess my question is, what's an action item that you personally take from this conversation, and what's an action item that you would suggest others take from this conversation? And so Gwen, we'll start with you.
So an action item that I think so every day that we get to live on this earth, I think is an opportunity for bringing betterment to our communities, to ourselves, and the people around us. So I just think we all own being the very best person that we can possibly be each day that we have an opportunity to walk this earth.
Thank you so much, Connie.
Yeah, we had a CEO once upon a time, Warner Baxter, that always talked about starting and ending conversations with gratitude. And that is where I instantly went to when you said that, what action do I take from this to continue to be grateful, to be in an environment, to be able to help drive change that sets people up to be in an environment where they can be heroes. So I think we keep trying to lift each other up, keep trying to move the business forward, keep energy resilient and strong and affordable, and keep powering the quality of life. That's what we're committed to.
And Chris, round us out.
All right. Well, I want to say avert any shame. Don't be ashamed of yourself or your company if you feel like you're behind in taking action to welcome and build inclusion. Start where you are today. Start with any of the tools that the NARUC staff will provide after this webinar. There's a deck with 4 or 5 roadmaps for DEI, one from CEWD, as Gwen mentioned, a very good one from Renewables Forward. I encourage you to use these. Are free. They are designed for energy businesses. Start wherever you are. Assess, pick 1 or 2 things, push forward, measure, take 6 months, 12 months, measure, keep going. Just start.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank Gwen and Connie and Chris for such a fantastic conversation. I feel like we could have went on really getting our groove and our jive there. So I know we could have went on a lot longer to talk about this, but I think you provided so much impactful information for us regulators, for those who work in the company, and those who just care about this issue, about why centering people is so important. So I'm going to pass it over to our wonderful chair of the Select Committee of Regulatory and Industry Diversity, Commissioner Coleman, to close us out with some announcements.
Thank you. Thank you so much, each and every one of you. Thank you, Commissioner Lewis, for your leadership in this webinar. And thank you, Connie, Chris, and Gwen, for your great information. As you can see on the screen, there will be NARUC's annual conference coming up in November of this year in Anaheim, California. We look forward to as many of you as possible being able to attend this. We'd love to see you there. And of course, the Select Committee on Regulatory and Industry Diversity is the committee that is sponsoring this webinar today in conjunction with NARUC. So we really appreciate all of you in the audience. We appreciate your attendance. Thank you so much, and keep an eye out for the next webinar. Have a great rest of your day and weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Thank you.